It's a pleasure to see you all. Thank you for making your way over to the museum, especially on such a rainy afternoon. It's good to see all of you here. My name is Andrew Westover, and I'm the Elmore McDonald Store's Director of Education here at the High Museum of Art. I'm excited to welcome you to this afternoon's conversation featuring our esteemed guests, Bruce Onobrakpeya and dele. The program, yes. This program is in conjunction with our current exhibition that just opened, Bruce Onobrakpeya, The Mask and the Cross, which was organized by the High Museum of Art. The exhibition was made possible by funding from our exhibition series donors, the National Endowment for the Arts, Delta Airlines Incorporated, Premier Exhibition Series supporters, ACT Foundation, William N. Banks Jr., the Cousins Foundation, Burton M. Gold, Sarah and Jim Kennedy, Harry Norman Realtors, Wish Foundation, Benefactor Exhibition supporters, and Robin and Hilton Howell. And before we begin, I would also like to thank High Museum members who are in attendance today. Your support is invaluable and fuels our mission. If you are not yet a member of the museum or need to review, please visit high.org at the end of today's program. I'd also like to thank staff members Rita, Noah Schmitz, John Voorhees, and the full High team for their help making this program happen. And now, I'm pleased to welcome exhibition curator Lauren Tate Baeza, the High's friend and Rita Richman, Curator of African Art, who will share more about this program and today's honored guests.
It's just my friends. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here with us on this rainy, cold day. And thank you, Dele. Thank you, Baba. I especially want to thank all of the people who traveled across this country and from abroad to celebrate this important artist and the historic moment that is his first United States Museum solo exhibition. I'll speak just briefly about the origins of this exhibition and how it progressed, and I'll provide a little background on the celebrated artist for those being introduced to his work for the first time. As the first U.S. show of its kind for Onobrakpeya, I have a responsibility to make it clear that in his career, which spans more than half a century, he has and continues to explore a vast range of creative and conceptual expressions, diverse in both subject matter and form. And it is my hope that this exhibition encourages U.S. audiences to learn more about his prolific career. The Mask and the Cross is a special presentation exclusively focused on Onobrakpeya's stylistic interpretations of Bible stories. It's also a close reading on his engagement with the Christian church's experimental art programs in 1960s Nigeria. The stories of the works in this show begins when Onobrakpeya is approached in 1966 to create a mural for the interior perimeter of a Catholic church in Lagos. The facilitator of this endeavor, Reverend Father Kevin Carroll, commissioned many artists for undertakings such as this, including local artists such as noted woodcarver Lamidi Fakaye, for example. As a result, Father Carroll and the priest he worked with secured commissions that played an important role in funding the early careers of many Nigerian artists of the late colonial period and early post-colonial period, connecting the church with Nigerian art history in an interesting and perhaps surprising way. Onobrakpeya accepted the invitation, and following the mural's completion, he referred to his drafts and studies to create a corresponding series of prints. The results are 14 colored block prints on rice paper, which take on a quality almost like that of textiles. They depict, in order, the Passion story, from Jesus' condemnation through his crucifixion and finally being laid to rest. This complete set of narrative prints are among the things I discovered in the High Museum's collection in my first 6 months as a curator of African art here. It was quietly stored here for 15 years, a donation from the late US diplomat George Amel Nyafe. What gold. When I discovered these beautiful prints, I set out to propose an exhibition that not only displayed these works, but that followed a through line of Onobrakpeya's artistic relationship with biblical references. The exhibition includes extremely rare proofs, artist proofs of prints that he used to illustrate a Christian children's textbook called May Your Kingdom Come, which was published in 1968 as part of the Nigerian National Catholic School Program and assigned to 5th and 6th grade primary school students. This was also facilitated by Father Kevin Carroll. The book, which would be read by generations of children, contained 60 illustrations, all by Onobrakpeya. And our exhibition centrally includes selections from these 60 corresponding artist proofs. The exhibition also includes thematically Christian works made by Onobrakpeya after these original 1960s commissions, from 1975 to reproductions made just this year. And these demonstrate the artist's characteristic iterative process. That is to say that Onobrakpeya often uses plates again or repeats drawings, but he changes the processes and treatments in a manner that makes such works nonetheless unique, an approach that foregrounds his technical range. So, I hope you enjoy the exhibition, my first exhibition for the High Museum of Art. It was an absolute pleasure to work on. Thank you. And I did so with the assistance of an incredible support team that I found as I pursued this project in Nigeria. The Onobrakpeya family was extremely helpful, notably Bruce's eldest daughter, Kabari Onobrakpeya Rowland. Yeah. Kabari jumped in and shared this journey with me in the last year of its planning. So before I turn over the conversation to Dele and Bruce, I invite Kabari to share a few words as well.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Lauren. I would like to start by thanking the High Museum of Art for hosting this amazing exhibition of artworks by my father, Dr. Bruce Onobrakpeya. We join Atlanta in welcoming him back to our great city. And I also say welcome to my family in attendance, Antonio Rowland, Ufoma Onobrakpeya, Dr. and Mrs. Ojide, Maxwell and his wife, Mr. Okwa, flying in from all over the country. Thank you so much for coming. Also, thank you to our friends, patrons, and guests. Thank you. It is such a joy and a pleasure to see you all, and I'll be remiss if I didn't thank the team of people at the High Museum who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this amazing show happen. Also, the esteemed board and members of this great museum, we thank you so much for honoring us with your presence. I would also like to thank the Curator of African Art, Lauren Tate Baeza, for tirelessly pursuing this amazing series of artworks and masterpieces by Bruce Onobrakpeya. Thank you for visiting and looking into our continent to seek out one of Africa's greatest and most celebrated artists. Thank you. I started thinking about writing this introduction on that beautiful winter day in February, after Lauren asked if I would do the honor of introducing my dad. She had just arrived back from visiting the artist in Nigeria and invited my husband and I to the High Museum to view some of the artworks that she had brought back for this art exhibition. It truly warmed my heart to see the rare collection that my father had produced as far back as the late 60s right in front of my eyes. And in seeing the art again, I thought to myself that it's really rare for him to release and entrust anyone with these treasured artworks, because I've always known him to guard the art really jealously over the years. So it was such an honor for him to release it to Lauren. I was very emotional, but yet inspired at the same time, and my heart was truly full. I remember thinking to myself that it would be such a gift for these artworks to be exhibited right here in Atlanta. A gift not just to us, but to everyone for everyone to view and enjoy. In that moment, I was truly grateful, and this was going to happen in my adopted city of 20 years and the hometown of my husband, Antonio Rowland. I must preface this all by saying that we are indeed in the presence of greatness, because as my father showed us as we were growing up, because of his inspirations and the things that he taught us, he also taught us that greatness is inspiring the change you want to see in anything. Many may ask, who's Bruce Onobrakpeya? He's not just my father, but he's one of Africa's greatest artists. He's an icon and with a really expansive career that has impacted so many. He's also an author, a poet, a philanthropist, Nigeria's national treasure, and a very energetic man who's actually living his life's purpose on this earth. And he's fulfilling it to the fullest every single day at 90. Many best describe Bruce Onobrakpeya as a renowned African master artist with over 60 years of creativity and experimentation and artistic discovery over all of these years, with creative genius that has contributed greatly to contemporary African and modern art. The artist has influenced many generations of artists through his work, his books, his foundation, the Bruce Onobrakpeya Foundation, in which I'm one of the trustees, his annual Hamilton workshops, and his apprenticeship and mentorship programs. My father has always been a very intense and intentional artist that has expressed his artistry and art forms through various styles, abstracts, paradigms, murals, colors, shapes, and sizes. In his life's pursuits, he has impacted and lifted up many people, including low-income artists, families, students, and through their talent and love for art, he has inspired them to expand upon their gifts and be the very best artists that they can ever be. His creativity in the abstract and other forms have resulted in the production of a vast collection of different styles of artworks. The use of diverse surfaces, both on paper, on metal, retrieved from recycled products, copper foils, epoxy, and wood are just a few of the ways that he has experimented with his art. And he's always explored, And he's always explored this creativity in every different art style that he's worked on. A lot of Bruce Onobrakpeya's artworks and illustrations, abstract and otherwise, are pieces that tell a story, some of which depict Bible stories and that informed my childhood, especially periods when I began to gain a lot more understanding of his art. Many of his other artworks depict a vast spectrum of different artistic creations, and I have always particularly admired his Christian art, some produced as far back as 1968, and I've also been able to visually appreciate and relate to his beautiful renditions of stories from the Bible. Renditions of the Last Supper, Jesus preaching, Feasts at Canaan, depictions within masterpieces of the Stations of the Cross, and many more. As a child, I was able to happily share with my friends and at my reputable private school that we attended that these are my dad's art pieces that he did, and the pictures in those pieces just look just like me and them. And so it was really exciting to see those artworks in the early years. I always knew that my dad, Bruce Onobrakpeya, was a really very special person, and I was always in awe of his artistic gift and talent. As kids, we always hung out with him in his studio whenever he gave us crayons and paper to draw and scribble whatever we wanted. Even though I have no recollection, you can see that at the age of 3 or 4, I managed to scribble my childlike name over there on one of his art pieces that we have shown here today. My dad graciously allowed us to scribble and play around in his art studio many times. He also read us lots of bedtime stories and encouraged us to read books and to expand our views of the world. He often read us African fairy tales and helped expand our imaginations long after we had read them. And I must say there was always a lesson to learn at the end of every Nigerian fairy tale. In the last 40 or more years, he has illustrated several books for esteemed authors, including Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, Cyprian Ekwensi, and many others. Growing up, I can give a couple of great examples of moments of recognition for me that helped me cement the fact that my father was truly a special person and living in his greatness. We witnessed many guests and collectors, including artists, come from far and near to visit his art studio and our home gallery in Nigeria. But one occasion in particular stands out in my mind. This was when Mrs. Joan Mondale, she's an artist, but also she's an author and the wife of the 42nd Vice President of the United States, visited our home studio and gallery in Lagos, Nigeria. I remember the Secret Service showing up in our neighborhood a week before and sweeping the entire neighborhood just to make sure it was safe for her. We heard a lot of buzz, and our neighbors, there was a lot of excitement in the air, and our neighbors whispered but trusted that, as usual, somebody important was visiting Bruce Onobrakpeya yet again. When Mrs. Mondale finally arrived, she was so excited to meet my dad, and he gave her a tour of his studio and gallery and shared the creative process behind his artworks and stories that inspired all of the works that he was showing her. She also shared her stories about her own artistic journey and expressed how happy she was at the opportunity to visit the studio. Before she left, she graciously presented my dad with a gift of an art pottery, which she made especially for him, and he still has till this day. Even though I was really young, I knew something important had just happened. that I had witnessed something great within the realm of what an artist works so hard for, to be seen, to be validated, and recognized for his art, which is one of the great rewards and gifts to any talent. Thank you. I felt that this was truly a gift, and to me this exemplifies greatness. The second instance was in 1989 when Maya Angelou visited Lagos, Nigeria. She was truly very excited, and she told Bob Brown that she really wanted to meet Bruce Onobrakpeya. She told that she admired his art very much and wanted to at least spend 5 minutes with him. When they eventually met, Miss Angelou asked if she could read him some poetry. And so she stood up and read my dad poetry she read my dad poetry from her esteemed book titled, it's actually an award-winning book titled Now Sheba Sings the Song. And she personally autographed a gift of that book with him, to him, and she said, "Thank you, Bruce, for all the wonderful art." And recently, my father showed me that book, which he still has till this day. Just in conclusion, I must say that I witnessed so many more of these kinds of great moments, which I now recognize as what will be building blocks to his now very vast repertoire. As many of you may know, to this day, artworks of Bruce Onobrakpeya graces many institutions around the world, such as the Tate Modern in London, the Vatican, which I saw when I was out in Rome, the Vatican in Rome, the Smithsonian Institution, and many halls of fame, galleries, and homes, and now the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. Looking back in retrospect, I realized that we have always been in the presence of an iconic and great person whose artistry has been able to inspire and impact so many. It is such an honor to witness yet another celebration of his art through this exhibition on this world stage. We thank him for believing in the transformative power of art in telling the important stories and for gracing our lives through artistic expression. We pray he continues to thrive at 90 and for many more years as he journeys through the important places where he can continue to share his truly amazing gift with us all. I join everybody in welcoming you, Daddy. We honor you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to hand it to you in just a moment. Oh, that was so moving. Thank you, Kabari. And again, thank you for all of your help and support in putting this exhibition together. There's not much more to say about Bruce after that wonderful, wonderful personal biography and an impact on your lives, both as the icon he is in Nigeria and as your father. But I'm going to try. I'm going to hand this conversation over to Dele and Bruce, but first I'll give another sort of summary biography of them, or just read a little bit about Dele in particular. Dele Jegede is an artist himself and also an art historian who lives and works in Ohio. He is the recipient of the Distinguished Africanist Award from the University of Texas, Austin. He has had work shown in numerous solo and group exhibitions locally and internationally, and has contributed to leading publications on African visual arts and arts of the Black diaspora. He has also written extensively about Bruce Onobrakpeya in particular, contributing chapters to many volumes that deal with his work, and also has written the definitive survey of works on Bruce Onobrakpeya, which is available in our gift shop. And Bruce, of course, is one of Nigeria's most recognized artists, renowned for his contributions to African modernism. He's had a commanding influence on generations, contributing illustrations to poetry volumes and novels of national significance, as Kabari mentioned, and mentoring many artists who would become notable in their own right. For his achievements, he has received the highest national honors in his native country, as well as global recognition, such as honors at the 44th Venice Biennale, which is decades before, I should mention, there even was a Nigerian pavilion at Venice. And he is one of the very few UNESCO living human treasures. Before I hand it off, I just want to make sure that you all know, in case you're eager to ask questions, that you'll have an opportunity to do so. They will just have a discussion for about 40 minutes, and then we will have someone in the audience available with a microphone. So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and they will come and find you. So without further ado, join me in welcoming one more time Dele, Jegede, and Bruce Onobrakpeya.
Hi. Okay. This is a very beautiful Department of Fine Arts at Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria. Just something to feed your eyes on while we do the real talk here. Let me thank everybody who is here, and particularly the organizers of this particular show. I wasn't able to see the show on Thursday, but I have soaked in as much of it as I can. It's truly amazing. There are quite a number of pieces there that even I was a little startled to see, and they were produced recently as 2011. But we are here today to have a conversation with the icon himself, Bruce Onobrakpeya. You did mention that his collections are everywhere, including the Vatican and even here. I want to very proudly also mention that my home also have very. Not that I could afford it, it's through his generosity. This is the most generous artist you'd ever come across. Those of you who have had the benefit of interacting with him would probably testify to that. But sir, let me start with the issue of African modernism. And I want the conversation to be essentially focused on you. I'm particularly interested in the context of production, and that would include the whole arena that gave birth to your work. Down the road, I also want to move on to what has become a very, for me, troubling kind of phrase that everybody drops everywhere now, the Zaria rebels. A little sickening for me, but I want us to get to that. And then, of course, I want for you to be able to also share with us what role religion has played in your work. And particularly, I'm interested in interrogating your work vis-a-vis the way you title them, and the essence of traditional religion in that. Let me start with your own notion of modernism. There has been this idea of periodizing. Art historians are guilty of that, of compartmentalizing. It's very difficult for art historians to function if they cannot put things in pigeonholes, in little boxes and compartmentalize them. So they put art movements in periods. And so we come with this notion of modernism. My contention is that every age probably thinks of itself as modern, even the cavemen. Ooh, we found light, and this is modern. Right, and so, but in regard to art, I would want you to oblige us by looking at your work and relating to us what exactly, how do you define the modernist impetus in your work?
Thank you, Dele Jegede. I feel quite confident that you are sitting here and asking these questions. You know, the stage flight and all that is out because you've always been with me, you've always worked with me, you've always collated my works, you've always published me. So your being there inspires a lot of confidence. I thank you very much. And I thank the audience for actually sitting down here and listening to what you're saying. Now, my idea of modernism is very simple, particularly as it relates to African art. I see it, and you know it, that it's a simple transition from the art we practice at home to the present. There's no hard facts that divide them. I told you earlier that African art, which was of course labeled primitive art and all that, was ahead of its time. And what modern art is doing is just to catch up with it. I don't want to say more. You see, the African art, abstract, semi-abstract, spiritual, looking outside the present and going into the future and going backward. And it's a type of story that the art of today, the modern art, is seeking to express. And I want to repeat that African art was ahead of its time. And what we see as modern art today is just a seamless transition from the African art to the present time. Thank you.
I think it's a privilege to have you, sir, here. And he makes me look big by telling you that I've always been with, he has been the one who has been pushing me, dragging me along. And so it's the other way around. Don't believe. And that also speaks to his humility, which is extraordinary. There is this very favorite proverb of mine that I keep dropping, and it's the one that Chinua Achebe popularized, that until the lions have their own historian, the history of the hunt will always favor the hunter. here is our own lion, who is his own hunter. There is never an artist I've come across who has documented himself or herself to the extent that Bruce Onobrakpeya has. Every little detail, if you bought a piece of print from him, or if he gave it to you, let us say in 1963, most likely he has the record. And here some of us struggle, who bought that painting of mine 5 years ago? I mean, he's just incredible in that regard. And so he has very beautifully summarized his own notion of modernism, but of course we now would say that we are no longer dealing in modern art. He has seen it all. We are dealing with what, 75 years altogether. Zaria, 1958, 57, and then recently celebrated his 90th birthday, and I want to wish you a belated happy birthday publicly again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Some of us are not half your age, and we are already looking for repairmen and handymen. We come quite differently. Anyway, to come back to the issue of modernism, I think that the history of Nigerian art cannot be written, obviously, without people like him, and very boldly too. But in essence, he has been the one of most of the students in Zaria in those days who has kind of gathered the most from everybody, who has benefited by moving with people. And we'll get to that point now, that in the 60s, the year of independence, I would want you to please enlighten us what the context was, what the environment was, because it's very easy for us to now, Nigeria is what? Nigeria became independent in 1960, and but at that time, you were also one of those at the vanguard of creativity with Demasun Woko, Uche Okeke, and many others. Can you please give us a snippet, a view, take us back to the eve of Nigeria's independence and look particularly at what the art scene was. And then we can make that journey from Nigeria of 1959, 1960 to Atlanta, the High Museum of 2023. We can fill the gap ourselves. But give us, please, give us what it looked like. What was the creative environment in the year that you graduated, in the year that you started practicing? Briefly.
Well, if I have to make it brief, let me read you a small passage here, and that will help you understand what it was then. It's very brief and right. I want to say that in the late 50s and early 1960s, many countries in Africa, including Nigeria, were grappling with the struggle for independence from colonial masters. A few of us in this ferment were inspired by speeches and wisdom of political giants like Nnamdi Azikiwe, Bafemi Awolowo, Ahmadu Bello, all of Nigeria, Nkrumah of Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Leopold Sedar Senghor of Senegal, Denis Brutus and others who were fighting the obnoxious apartheid regime of South Africa. 8 of us namely Dimas Wonko, Simon Okeke, Yusuf Grillo, Oseloka Osadebe, Wangbara, Felix Okiada, Emmanuel Dita, Uche Okeke, the president, and my humble self, Bruce Onobrakpeya, formed a group called the Zaria Art Society. Somehow, our mantra or manifesto of natural synthesis, which is of course recourse to the roots, was seen as a way forward in the new independent states. Kojo Fosu, a Ghanaian professor at the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, nicknamed the group Rebels. Quaint as the name sounded, it heralded a kind of revolution which cleared new path for art and life in post-independent Nigeria. I want to add to that a little bit by saying that at the time of independence, Nigeria, most countries in Africa have lost the power of self-expression. Nothing done in Africa was good. Everyone was looking forward to either New York, Britain, Paris, and so on. And the colonial masters at that particular time gave us scholarship to go to school, seemingly saying that please study, try as much as you can to bring these people back to the greatness which had been there in Africa. And so what we did was to, even from that time, to try to play being leaders, try to think of ourselves at the vanguard of bringing new ideas. The ideas which say, go back in time, examine the good things in your environment, the good things, the history of your people, what they've done that you can be proud of and that you can carry with you. Also, look beyond your environment, take the good things from outside, marry all these things together, and create a new great nation. So that was the feeling, the policy, the kind of idea that pushed us at those early days of 1960 when we attained independence. Thank you.
Thank you. At the time that he was referring to, artists were extremely rare. So I'm talking of modern artists because there were artists all over the place, except that nobody ever bothered telling anybody that they were artists, because that's what everybody does, who dances, who composes songs, who weaves, and who carves. But then the introduction of art departments occurred in Uganda, for example, and then of course in Zaria. It started in Ibadan and then moved to Zaria, which became, well, it started as the Nigerian College of Arts, Science, and Technology, and then became, it was upgraded to a university in 1962. So by then, you had left Zaria.
Yes.
Okay. But then we are looking at the intersection of production and patronage here now. Because if you do not have people to tell others about you, you probably work in vain. You may be an artist, and if nobody heralds you, if nobody tells others about you, you can't go as far as you probably should. And so we have people like Ulibaya, who happened a lot, very heavily in Nigeria of the 1960s. Susan Wenger, many of you may have heard the story. At that time, it was a novel thing to see people go to college to study art. Until recently, I think parents in Nigeria were always very kind of concerned to learn that their kids are going to study. What? You're going to study what? Art? I mean, that's you're pauperizing the family. Why would you not do engineering or other things like that? And so they were the brave ones that went for it. But let us also contextualize that many of them, the first generation Ahmadu Bello, were not they're what we would call non-traditional students today. They were fully mature, and so that was what led to the success of synthesis. Looking back, that's number one. The second thing also was that you add to that particular environment the presence of European teachers, mainly British. The curriculum, the syllabi, were imported from Britain. And so it became very easy for them to feel alienated from their own environment. And so what they were being taught on the one hand, they would do it. But what they wanted to do, they also would do privately. And that was why, that was what gave birth to this idea of Zaria rebels. But to come back to Oshogbo, to Ulibaya, to Susan Wenger, Georgina Betts played a role initially in the background, but eventually became Baya's second wife. What was it that led you to the streets of Ibadan? How the encounter with Van Roosten occurred that gave you this idea of buying, a printing machine, that etching machine that eventually led to, all sorts of things now that made them label you as Africa's master printmaker. Can you give us an idea of your interaction with Oshogbo, with Ulibaya, and what happened thereafter?
Yeah, thank you. At Zaria, at the art school at Zaria, I had two other friends, Dimas Woko and the late Uche Okike. We entered at the same time. We entered the school at the same time. They were interested in painting, and peer pressure also pushed me into painting. But our graphic teacher, Eric Taylor, wanted me to come to his department. I didn't want to do works for the newspapers. I didn't want anything that would not create painting on the wall that will carry my name, or sculptures in the street that will herald me as a great artist. So I went through painting, passed and came out. Then Ulibaya, who was a lecturer at the University of Ibadan, ethnographer, interested very much in the culture of people, particularly the Yorubas, had, with the help of Wole Soyinka, J.P. Clark, and so on.
Dennis Jordan and many of them.
Yes, they opened up a place in Ibadan they call Mbari Artists and Writers Club.
If I may interrupt a little bit, the picture you're looking at, you have, this is particularly interesting because you have Ulibaya to your left. Then you have Jacob Lawrence sitting next to him, I can't see the one next to him. There is Duro Ladipo in the whole mix. The guy in striped, what is it, grab, is Dennis Jordan, who also was a very active kind of person in the Oshogbo circle. Sorry to intervene.
Yeah, it's all right. So, Mbari Mbayo, with Ulibaya there, had exhibitions. People like Ibrahim Salahi all attended. Witty came from South Africa and so on. But then Baya left Ibadan and went to Oshobo to establish what we call Mbari Mbayo. He created a center there and stayed there with Susan Winger and later Georgina. I call her Georgina Beds because we were together in Zaria.
Okay.
She later married
Ulibaya.
So at Oshobo, Ulibaya worked with Duro Ladipo. And on the background was Susan Winger, who had been called to decorate the shrines, the Oshobo shrines and so on. They now had a workshop, which was started in Ibadan. And I was invited, I was one of those invited to the workshop. At the end of the workshop, I realized that I had a remedial. That is to say, what I lost in Zaria, I now gained in Oshobo. I was very fortunate that one Rukan Rusen, a professor from Tilburg University, was brought down. He put me through gave me all the tricks of printmaking, and from then on, I was so caught up with printmaking that I never painted for about between 20 and 15, between 15 and 20 years. So that was it. So the workshop at Oshobo actually brought back to me what was there, but I didn't know it. With Ruva Rosen giving me all, as I mentioned, all the tricks and all the details, all the things I could do in order to progress as a graphic artist. He even helped me to buy my first press from Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. We ordered it and then papers, materials, and all these things, and then that started me off. Maybe you come to that later. What that workshop, Duro Ladipo, Susan Winger did to Oshobo was so impressive to me that I said, if in future I have the chance and have the money, I was going to do a similar thing as Uli had done at Oshobo. Maybe I should just say now that. Well,
we can make the leap now and go to Agbara Auto.
Yes.
That's where we're heading, right?
So what happened was that Oshobo, because of the presence of Uli, Susan Wenger, Duro Ladipo, there was enlightenment. People started visiting Oshobo. There was a whole forest that was covered with artworks. At the time, Oshobo now became like a Mecca. Mm-hmm. People go there on pilgrimage. And I realized the power of art in opening up an environment. And so I decided that if I would run into some money or my idea to create a similar thing in Agbarota, I would do it. And that was how I started off the Hamatan Bookshop, which has been running for 25 years. I must add that Oshobo became a heritage center.
World Heritage.
World Heritage Center. And consciously behind my mind, I'm thinking that someday Agbaroto will also become a World Heritage Center.
Let's say amen to that.
Put on your hand.
This is like a prayer. Remember when you are airborne and you run into fierce turbulence, that's when you start reciting those biblical, psalms, and you pray to God. You build him a church if you were to survive. Here he has survived Oshobo, and he has fulfilled his promise of building a temple to art and community. I don't know how many of you have been to Agbaroto. I have not been there, but I've read, I've followed all the events at Agbaroto. Indeed, there is that connection between informal art and formal art. And that, in fact, was what raged in Africa, not only in Nigeria. During the year of Africa's independence, beginning with Ghana becoming independent in 1957, Nigeria and other countries in the decade of 1960s, many African countries attained independence from their respective colonial masters. But also, there was within the art circle, the war, not Cold War, not warm war. There was a war of sorts going on between those who had been exposed to the formal art kind of language and those who were, who were trained in ateliers and as apprentices. And you would have people like Ulibaya. There are people who supported him. There were also people who were against the method that he introduced because they felt that having a shortcut to art was not the most profitable thing. But here we have, sitting right before you, the person who embodies both worlds, the formal and the informal. And you find that when you grow up, you want to be a Bruce Onobrakpeya. That is the way to go. That is the most profitable way of getting your work, of becoming very productive. To do that for the last 65 years plus, that is immense. That's immense. And it is amazing to have somebody who continually produces. He has moved from printmaking to painting and back, and then moved on to installation, and computer discarded stuff. And then I bring you back, sir, to this notion of tradition. What role does tradition play in your work? And particularly, I want you to pay attention and put emphasis on traditional religion. How has that affected your art? In what ways can we see the impact of traditional culture, religion in your work?
Thank you. The traditional philosophy, which also deals with the religion, is very, very imaginative. It takes us from this world to the world beyond, and it helps us to think of things which we think are not possible. And that's traditional religion. It gives you the philosophy of life, how to get on, punishment, rewards, and so on and so forth. But the part of the traditional religion that I like most is the worship. That is to say, the people, the priests, the people create they create temples, altars to worship their ancestors, also to worship their gods. And those creations are very, very artistic. And some of the style that I adopt today is actually inspired by the style that the people in the Delta region use to express themselves in worship of the traditional deities. Now, I'm talking now about what you call shrines. Now I call them installations. With a shrine, you have a lot of objects decorated, refined, put there to honor the gods or the ancestors. And they are assembled. A group of, not just a single thing, very many artworks are put together. So each of the artworks join up with the other in order to create a kind of magic. That magic is very, very powerful. And I have used it in painting. It makes my work look very busy, but it gives a kind of magic that you cannot get with a single work. So the traditional shrines have inspired me to create many things. Now you talked about, you mentioned, well, I mentioned the installation. Now I'm doing some other things outside, which are using the recycled parts in creating outdoor works. Again, this is based on the traditional concept of setting up sculptures. Some of them are groups, some of them may be single, but with other things tethered around them, just to create something that is beautiful and very, very exciting. So the traditional art has a lot of things around them that will continue to inspire me or continue to inspire some other artists. In the exhibition there's a particular work done in beads. It's not my work.
Yeah.
The artist was there yesterday. You know, but you can see the power of a lot of things put together in order to express just the idea of the garment of a king. That is the type of thing that I have learned from the traditional setting which continue to inspire my work.
I don't know if you observed a very subtle shift in the language that he deployed there. Rather than call his work shrine, he says they are installation. That is so hip. But indeed, it's also a demonstration of sensitivity to what is prevalent in Africa generally, and particularly in Nigeria today. Those of you who follow Nigeria, you would know there is what appears to be an earthquake of sorts on the religious front, where you have Pentecostals and everywhere is a church now. So much so that to talk about shrines is to be sacrilegious to them. It's like, it's a taboo, like he said. And yet, that in fact is what has sustained him, his work. It has novelty, it has a power, and art endures in all of that. I think to round up with one last question before we turn the floor open to people who might have one or two questions. I want you to look at, this is a painting. Is that your work or is it a fake?
It's a painting. Urapele, The first study was made in 1968 and developed into a painting. First of all, a small print, and later, last year, into a large painting like this. This is rapidly.
And what we are dealing with here is the notion of really claiming yourself, asserting yourself. If you do not do it, you are rendered ineffeminate. I apologize for feminists here. I didn't use that word to impugn anybody's integrity, but it becomes a major issue if you allow others to determine who you should be, what or how should be. Bruce Onobrakpeya, sitting before you, ladies and gentlemen, is the embodiment of all the aspirations of those who wish Africa well. He's the one who has put together over 90 plus years the notion that you have to be self-assertive. Even his name, I remember teaching my students in college, yes, you have to learn to pronounce Onobrakpeya. It is true. Even if you were to use toothpick at the end of that, because some of them would be lost in your teeth, you manage to. Today, it's a non-issue that you, and also you look at Bruce, forgive me, Paul Onobrakpeya. You can see the synthesis that they started with, and the idea of really not being opposed to learning from as many sources as you have the opportunity to, and he demonstrated that in Zaria and also on the streets, so to say, of Oshogbo and Ibadan. And of course, he has also now done a crossover. He now incorporates, guess it, computer discards in his work, and that way he produces new works. And I want you to please join me in appreciating Bruce Onobrakpeya here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we'll have room for questions or answers.
Hello, everyone.
Whichever.
We have time for about 2 questions, but we invite you to stay afterwards and speak to our wonderful guests after the end of the show. So if you want to just raise your hand, I have my first one here.
Thank you, Dr. Onobrakpeya. My name is Masi Essien. It's a privilege to have you here today. I've had the privilege of visiting your studio back in the 90s with my brother, who was also an artist. And it's such an honor to have you here today. I have one question, though. What would you think about the current agitation to return the works of art that were taken out of Africa during the colonial period, the current agitation to have them returned back to their rightful places?
Very simple. The work should be returned. And they are being returned. But the issue is this. They want the works to be put in the government hand. But I want the works to go back to the palaces where they were taken from. Because they were not just only artworks, they served several cultural purposes. They should be taken back, and the various obas and kings can decide to do whatever he wanted with them. The question of the fear that once you return them, they're going to be stolen or they're going to scatter again should not exist at all. In the first place, the works were created. We created the works. We knew their value. We knew their place. And we know how to keep them. And so, once they are brought back, we are sure to be able to redirect the use. If the old use is no more there, we redirect them and build museums, put things there, put people there that will take care of them. So let the works be returned. Thank you.
The 3 words which we're going to borrow from Nike, just do it. Next question. Somebody here.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Inaligu Okwa. I had the pleasure and privilege to have worked with the two of you before. About 30 years ago, I asked you this common question. I actually accused you of being masters of Nigerian art. And you started pointing fingers all over the country, and we ended up with about 10 or 20 people, and then we whittled it down to about 12, and we showed their works together. Now, looking forward, who are the 5 or 10 names you could suggest that we keep an eye on in contemporary African art?
Thank you, Okwa. You belittle contemporary African art. You're talking about 5 works. I should mention 50. I should mention 100. We have so many good artists now, all over the place, within each country, and all over Africa as a whole. We have so many artists. And what is going on now is that publishers are trying to look at African art over a period of over 100 years. 2 publications have come out, and you see that every work has a power, has a position, has a future, and the art has grown and is growing. And you will also understand that there has been a lot of change, and the newer generation have advantages that we didn't have in our time. And so the work they're producing, sometimes we can't even understand them. So just to mention 4 or 5 is just not enough. We're thinking about 50, we're thinking about 100, we're thinking about more geniuses, more great artists that are emerging, not just from one small place, but all over the place. Thank you.